This was never meant to be a fair fight, and it is not a fair fight. We are punching them while they're down, which is exactly how it should be. They are toast, and they know it.
That was U.S. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth offering grim condolences to grieving Iranian families after U.S. airstrikes killed at least 168 children aged 7 to 12 at a girls' school in Minab, Iran. The targeting of a school begs an important question, however. Is the U.S. now again breaking the very international law it helped shape in the wake of the Second World War? First, let's circle back to what Washington's excuses were for attacking Iran.
And we knew that if we didn't preemptively go after them before they launched those attacks, we would suffer higher casualties and perhaps even higher those killed.
The president, prior to that phone call, had a good feeling that the Iranian regime was going to strike the United States assets and our personnel in the region. And the president was faced with a choice.
This narrative is strikingly similar to the one the U.S. used to justify the 2003 invasion of Iraq over Baghdad's alleged weapons of mass destruction. While it took the U.S. years to admit that Iraq had no WMDs after all, the Pentagon dismissed the possibility of an imminent strike from Iran mere days after the February 28 strikes on the country. A U.S. senator and senior figure within the U.S. intelligence community also offered a contrary assessment to Rubio's, questioning who Iran was actually a threat to.
There was no imminent threat to the United States of America by the Iranians. There was a threat to Israel. If we equate a threat to Israel as the equivalent of an imminent threat to the United States, then we are in uncharted territory. There needs to be the proof of an imminent threat to American interests.
From a legal perspective, there are three ways the U.S. and Israel violated international law in preemptively striking Iran. 1. The Caroline Test, a 19th century principle stipulating that a threat must be instant and overwhelming, leaving no choice and no moment for deliberation for an initial strike to be considered self-defense. Experts and critics conclude that this strict standard was simply not met on February 28 when U.S. and Israel struck Iran. 2. The Nuremberg Tribunal, which established that planning or waging a war on aggression is a crime against peace. 3. The UN Charter, which states that using military force against another country is illegal unless the UN Security Council approves it or it's strictly necessary for self-defense. So basically, for a strike like this to be considered legal under international law, there has to be a rock-solid casus belli, which is a formal justification for war. Usually that means you're either acting in self-defense against an attack that's already happened, or you're stopping an imminent threat, none of which applied to Iran, especially as U.S. officials struggle to align their stories as the weight of international backlash closes in.
If you look at sort of the permissibility or the legality of it, it's either with Security Council blessing, which we don't have here, or it has to be an act of self-defense. And the Trump administration, Marco Rubio and Donald Trump himself, tried to make some of these arguments, but I don't think they're particularly convincing until now. As much as politically one might not like the Iranian regime, it's still a question of whether the acts are legal, and from my assessment, they're not.
Article 2.4 of the UN Charter prohibits the threat or use of force against any state's territorial integrity or political independence. Killing a head of state directly attacks that independence. International law generally grants heads of state immunity from foreign jurisdiction, and an assassination blatantly violates the principle of non-intervention.
Well, most of the people we had in mind are dead. So, we had some in mind from that group that is dead. And now we have another group, they may be dead also.
And if the right to self-defense under international law belongs to anyone right now, the question many are asking is, doesn't it actually belong to the side that was struck first? It gets worse. While Israel enjoys what many experts say is an extensive secret arsenal of undeclared nuclear weapons, the US and Israel have for decades warned the international community of the imminent nuclear threat posed by Tehran. Since 1992, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has repeatedly and dramatically claimed Iran was only weeks away from finalizing an atomic bomb, all while his own country hides what is widely believed to be a stockpile of some 90 nuclear weapons at its demononuclear site. However, here's what the IAEA chief has for months been saying about Iran's nuclear program.
I said it last year, before the June 12-day war. We don't see a structured program to manufacture nuclear weapons. So that is the assessment of the agency.
What started as a talk of an imminent threat slowly morphed into what critics call a systemic intent to change Iranian leadership.
I guess the worst case would be we do this and then somebody takes over who's as bad as the previous person, right? That could happen. We don't want that to happen.
Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz went even further, openly stating that the next Iranian leader would be a target for elimination. A statement that, if carried out, would constitute a direct violation of international law. Meanwhile, the human cost continues to mount. U.S. strikes have killed at least 1,200 Iranians, including more than 180 children, in strikes that hit at least 20 schools and 10 hospitals across Iran. Strikes that constitute great violations of the Rome Statute, which prohibits intentionally targeting buildings dedicated to education and hospitals, provided they are not military objectives. All of this unfolded just one day after Omani officials announced that months of informal talks between the US and Iran had made progress, despite Washington and Tel Aviv claiming Tehran had stalled the negotiations.
Iran has been always open to diplomacy, and I think we have a very good record of that. Contrary to Americans, that their record is very bad and very negative. This is the second time that we negotiated with Americans and they decided to attack us right in the middle of negotiation.
Diplomacy interrupted by missiles. A sad tale we've seen in Palestine's Gaza and now in Iran. This contradiction has left observers wondering what the US and Israel's real priorities are. Internationally, the reactions have been mixed. Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez was one of the few leaders to condemn the strikes outright and called for peace. And after he refused to grant the US permission to use Spain's Moran air base to conduct strikes on Iran, Washington, unsurprisingly, launched threats of trade cutoffs at Madrid. Even within the US, voices of dissent have been emerging.
As a Marine, stand up for America.
And we are here to say no, we do not support Israel. We do not want to die for Israel. Stop the war in Iran right now.
Legal experts argue that the US and Israel have been testing the sanctity of international law for years, most recently in Gaza and Venezuela, and now in Iran. So, did the US and Israel somehow decide that rules are only for the weak and that security is simply a synonym for whoever strikes first?